Eleanor Hayes heard her grandson crying on the phone at 11:42 p.m. The house was dark. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than usual. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window, and the voice on the other end of the line was shaking. "Grandma, please don't tell Mom. I need you." Eleanor froze. Her hand tightened around the phone. It sounded like Jacob, the same trembling voice he had when he was little and called her from school because he was scared. The same softness at the end of his words. The same way he said, "Grandma," like she was the only safe place left in the world. For a few seconds, Eleanor did not think about scams. She did not think about technology. She did not think about danger. She thought only one thing: my grandson needs me. And after months of quiet dinners, unanswered messages, and visits that kept being postponed, those words reached a place in her heart that had been aching for a long time. "I need you." Eleanor stood from the kitchen chair so quickly that her knees nearly failed her. "What happened, Jacob?" The voice cried harder. "I'm in trouble, please. I can't explain everything. I need money tonight." Eleanor's heart began to race. She reached for her purse, then for the drawer where Robert used to keep important papers. Her hands trembled. The voice kept pleading, "Please hurry, Grandma." But before Eleanor opened her purse, her eyes fell on the Bible lying open on the kitchen table. Beside it was Robert's old reading glass. And in that moment, a sentence her late husband had said for 40 years returned to her mind like a hand on her shoulder. "Fear rushes. Wisdom waits." Eleanor closed her eyes. The voice was still crying. The pressure was growing, but she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Lord, give me wisdom." That pause saved more than her money. It exposed a loneliness her family had not been willing to see. Eleanor Hayes was 73 years old, a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and the kind of woman who still folded napkins before eating alone. Her house had not always been quiet. There had been years when it was full of footsteps, birthday candles, Sunday lunches, children running down the hall, and Robert laughing from the living room with the television too loud. But Robert had been gone for 5 years, and after he passed, the house seemed to grow bigger. The hallway felt longer. The kitchen table felt wider. The empty chair across from her became harder to ignore. Eleanor had 2 adult children. Linda, her daughter, lived 20 minutes away, but always seemed buried under work, errands, and responsibilities. David, her son, called mostly on holidays, and when something in his own life had finally slowed down enough for him to remember, she was waiting. But Jacob was different. Jacob was Linda's son, Eleanor's grandson. When he was little, he spent weekends at her house. He ate pancakes at her table. He asked Robert to teach him how to use a hammer. He curled up beside Eleanor during thunderstorms and asked her to pray until the thunder stopped sounding angry. Back then, Jacob needed her. Then he grew up. College, friends, a work, a girlfriend. A life that moved faster than Eleanor could follow. He still loved her. She knew that. But love that never arrives can begin to feel like memory. He sent short messages. "Love you, Grandma. Busy this week. I'll stop by soon." Soon became next week. Next week became next month. And Eleanor never wanted to be a burden, so she replied the same way every time. "That's all right, sweetheart. I understand." But every time she typed, "I understand," something inside her felt a little smaller. She did understand. But understanding did not make loneliness disappear. On the night of the call, Eleanor had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Her Bible was open to the book of James. She had meant to read. Instead, she had spent most of the evening looking at an old photograph of Jacob holding Robert's hand in the backyard. In the picture, Jacob was 7. His front tooth was missing. Robert's hand rested gently on the boy's shoulder. Eleanor touched the photo with one finger and whispered, "You would have called him Robert." Then she felt guilty for saying it. Linda was busy. Jacob was young. People had lives. She knew all the reasons. But still the ache remained. The phone rang at 11:42 p.m. Eleanor nearly dropped her tea. No one called that late unless something was wrong. She answered on the second ring. "Hello?" A young man's voice sobbed. "Grandma?" Her breath caught. "Jacob? Grandma, please don't tell Mom. I need help." Everything inside Eleanor moved toward him. That was what love does. It reaches before it reasons. The voice spoke quickly. There had been an accident. He was embarrassed. He was scared. He needed money sent through a link. He could not talk long. He begged her not to call Linda. He begged her not to ask questions. He begged her to hurry. Eleanor walked to the drawer where she kept her checkbook and bank papers. Her heart pounded so hard that she could barely hear. The voice said, "Grandma, please, you're the only one I can call." Those words nearly broke her. The only one. For months she had felt unnecessary. Now someone needed her. Not later, not someday, now. But then she saw the Bible. Still open, still quiet, still there. And Robert's words returned. Fear rushes. Wisdom waits. Eleanor took one breath, then another. "Jacob," she said carefully, "tell me something only you and I would know." The voice hesitated, then cried harder. "Grandma, there's no time." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the phone. Something felt wrong. The voice was familiar, but the pressure was not. The fear was loud, but wisdom was beginning to whisper. Eleanor placed the phone on speaker and sat down. Her hands trembled as she reached for Robert's old notebook beside the Bible. He had kept phone numbers there for years because he never fully trusted cell phones. Linda's number was written in blue ink. Jacob's was below it. The voice on the phone became impatient. "Grandma, are you there?" "I'm here. Please hurry." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Lord, help me see clearly." Then she did something that felt almost disobedient to her panic. She waited. She called Linda from the house phone while keeping the other call open. Linda answered with a sleepy voice. "Mom, is everything okay?" Eleanor's voice shook. "Is Jacob with you?" "What? No. Why?" "Call him. Right now." "Mom, what happened?" "Call him, Linda." There was silence, then movement. Then Linda breathing faster. "Okay, I'm calling him." The young voice on the speaker changed. "Grandma, who are you calling?" Eleanor did not answer. "Grandma, please don't do that." For the first time, the voice no longer sounded like a frightened boy. It sounded angry. Eleanor's heart sank. Linda came back on the line. "Mom," Jacob answered. "He's fine. He's at his apartment." The kitchen became very still. The rain kept tapping on the window. The clock kept ticking. The voice on speaker went silent for half a second. Then the call ended. Eleanor stared at the phone. Her whole body felt cold. It had sounded like Jacob. It had cried like Jacob. It had called her grandma, but it was not him. It was an AI scam. A false voice wearing the sound of someone she loved. Eleanor sat there, one hand over her mouth, the other resting on the open Bible. She had almost believed it, and that frightened her. But what frightened her more was the reason why. The lie had not only sounded like Jacob, it had sounded like being needed. Jacob arrived the next morning. He did not knock once and wait. He knocked fast, then opened the door with the spare key Eleanor had forgotten he still carried. "Grandma?" Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table. The Bible was still open. The phone was beside it. Her hands were wrapped around a mug she had not touched. Jacob stopped when he saw her. He was 22 now, tall, tired, and suddenly very young again. "Grandma," he said softly. Eleanor tried to smile. "I'm all right." But Jacob could see that she was not. Linda stood behind him, eyes red from crying. "I should have come last night," Linda whispered. Eleanor looked at her daughter. "You did answer. That is not the same as being present." No one spoke. Jacob sat across from Eleanor. "I listened to the recording Mom saved from the phone line," he said. "It sounded like me." Eleanor looked down. "It did. I don't understand how they did that." Linda said quietly, "They can use clips from videos, online posts, voice samples." "I read about it this morning." Eleanor nodded, but the explanation felt distant. Technology had created the voice, but absence had made it believable. Jacob looked at the phone on the table. then at the Bible, then at his grandmother's trembling hands. His face changed, not with fear now, with guilt. "Grandma," he said, voice breaking. "Maybe the lie sounded real because I stopped being present enough for you to know the difference." Eleanor looked up quickly. "Oh, sweetheart, no." But Jacob shook his head. "I used to call you every week. You have a life." "I know, but I made you a memory instead of a person I still visit." Linda covered her mouth. Jacob continued, tears in his eyes. "You almost trusted a stranger because the stranger sounded like a grandson who should have been calling." Eleanor began to cry then, not because she wanted Jacob to feel guilty, but because the truth had finally entered the room. For months, she had protected everyone from her loneliness. Now they were all looking at it. After Linda and Jacob left that afternoon, Eleanor sat alone again. The house felt different now, not safer, not yet. She locked the door twice, checked the phone, closed the curtains, then felt ashamed for being afraid. She sat at the kitchen table and whispered, "Robert, I almost fell for it." The shame came in waves. Maybe she was too old, too trusting, too lonely. Maybe the world had moved faster than she could keep up with. Maybe she was no longer sharp enough to live alone. Maybe this was how it began. One mistake, one scare. One moment when everyone realized she needed watching. That thought hurt deeply. Eleanor had always been careful. She had balanced checkbooks, raised children, helped Robert through illness, served in church, comforted neighbors, and prayed for more people than anyone knew. But now one phone call made her feel fragile. She opened the Bible with trembling hands and found Isaiah 46:4. "Even to your old age I am he, and to gray hairs I will carry you." She read it slowly, again, then again. God did not mock her age. He did not call her useless. He did not say she was foolish because she trembled. He promised to carry. Eleanor placed both hands over the page and cried quietly, "Lord, I need you to carry me in a world I don't always understand." The room was still. No dramatic answer came, but the shame loosened a little. Then she turned back to James, the passage she had meant to read the night before. James 1:5. "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God." Eleanor closed her eyes. Wisdom, not panic, not embarrassment, not pretending she was never afraid. Wisdom. She realized that asking for help did not make her weak. Confirming a story did not make her unloving. And growing older did not mean she had to become silent about danger. Maybe God had protected her not only for herself. Maybe he would use her to protect others. The following Sunday, Eleanor went to church earlier than usual. She carried a small notebook, her Bible, and a folded paper where she had written 3 words: "Fear rushes. Wisdom waits." After service, she asked Pastor Daniel if she could speak to the senior group before their weekly lunch. He looked surprised. "Of course, Eleanor." She stood in front of 12 older adults in a small room that smelled of coffee and chicken casserole. Her hands shook, but her voice held. "Something happened to me this week," she began. And she told them, not every detail, not to create fear, but to create discernment. She told them about the call, the voice, the pressure, the words, "I need you." She told them how close she had come to believing it. Then she looked around the room. Some faces were shocked. Others looked painfully familiar with the fear. "It was an AI scam," she said. "But it did not only attack my bank account. It attacked my love." The room became very quiet. It used the voice of my grandson. But more than that, it used the ache of a grandmother who wanted to feel needed. Several eyes filled with tears. Eleanor opened her Bible. Proverbs 14:15 says, "The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps." She paused. That verse is not calling us to be suspicious of everyone, but it is teaching us to be wise. Faith is not gullibility. Love is not panic. And fear is not the voice we must obey. Then she read James 1:5. "If we lack wisdom, we can ask God." She looked at the group. "So ask. Pause. Pray. Call someone. Confirm the story. Do not let fear force your hands before wisdom has had a chance to speak." For the first time in days, Eleanor did not feel ashamed. She felt useful, not because someone had needed her in panic, but because God was using her pain to warn, comfort, and strengthen others. Eleanor's story reveals a truth that is deeply needed in a world where voices can be copied, urgency can be manufactured, and fear can arrive through a phone call in the middle of the night. Not every familiar voice comes from truth. That is why Scripture calls God's people to discernment. Proverbs 14:15 says, "The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps." The Bible does not praise careless belief. It teaches wisdom. It teaches the child of God to pause, examine, confirm, and walk carefully. James 1:5 reminds us that wisdom is not only intelligence or experience. Wisdom is something we ask God for. Eleanor had lived 73 years. She had raised a family. She had buried a husband. She had survived seasons younger people had never faced. And still, she needed wisdom. That is not weakness. That is faith. And Isaiah 46:4 reminds every aging believer that God does not abandon his people when their hair turns gray. He carries, he sustains, he remains faithful. The world may treat older people as easy targets. Families may forget how much presence matters. Technology may become confusing, but God still sees the elderly. He still honors their prayers. He still gives them purpose, and he still provides wisdom for the next step. Eleanor's faith did not make her naive. It made her pause. It made her pray. It made her seek truth. And that pause became protection. A week later, Jacob came over without being asked. He brought groceries, but Eleanor noticed something different. He did not put them on the counter and rush away. He stayed. He sat at the table. He placed his phone face down, and he said, "Tell me about Grandpa." Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "What about him?" "Anything." I realized I know stories, but not enough. For the next hour, Eleanor talked about Robert's first job. The time he burned toast so badly, the smoke alarm frightened the dog. The way he prayed when Linda was sick as a child. The way he always said, "Fear rushes. Wisdom waits." Jacob listened. Really listened. Linda came later that afternoon. She carried no excuses this time, only flowers and a quiet apology. "Mom," she said, "I thought checking in was enough." Eleanor touched her daughter's hand. "I know you love me." "I do," Linda said through tears. "But I need to love you with more than intentions." Eleanor cried then, but softly, not from fear, from being seen. They did not become a perfect family that day. Jacob would still get busy. Linda would still forget sometimes. Eleanor would still have lonely evenings. But something changed. They began making a plan, not a dramatic promise, a simple one. Jacob would call every Tuesday night. Linda would visit every Saturday morning when possible. And Eleanor would tell them when she felt lonely instead of pretending she was fine. Before they left, Jacob looked at the Bible on the table. "Grandma?" "Yes?" "Would you show me that verse? The one about wisdom?" Eleanor smiled. She opened to James 1:5, and for the first time in a long time, her grandson leaned close to read scripture beside her. Months later, Eleanor still lived alone. The house was still quiet. Robert's chair was still empty. There were still nights when the rain made the rooms feel too large. But Eleanor was not the same. She had become a quiet voice of wisdom in her church. She helped start a small gathering for older adults about safety, prayer, family communication, and spiritual discernment. She told them practical things. Do not send money under pressure. Call another family member. Ask questions. Confirm the story. But she also told them deeper things. Do not let loneliness make you obey fear. Do not be ashamed to ask for help. Do not believe that age has erased your purpose. And to the younger families in the church, she said something with tenderness, not accusation. Call before there is a crisis. Visit before guilt forces you. Love your parents and grandparents while they can still hear your voice clearly. Jacob kept calling on Tuesdays. Not perfectly, but faithfully enough that Eleanor began to know his real voice again. Not just how it sounded, but how he was doing, what worried him, what made him laugh, what he was praying about. Linda learned too. She stopped saying, "We should get together soon," and began putting dates on the calendar. Eleanor still missed Robert. She always would. But now, when she saw his reading glasses beside the Bible, she did not only feel grief, she felt gratitude. His words had helped save her. Fear rushes. Wisdom waits. Maybe you know Eleanor's story. Maybe you are older and the world feels faster than it used to. Maybe you are a grandmother, a grandfather, a parent, or someone who feels remembered only when someone needs something. Maybe you are the adult child who loves your family but keeps postponing presents. Maybe you are young like Jacob, unaware that silence can make the people who raised you feel forgotten. This story is not only about an AI scam. It is about family. It is about discernment. It is about wisdom. It is about remembering that people do not stop needing love when they grow older. And it is about the God who still carries his people through gray hair, quiet houses, trembling hands, and frightening phone calls. The false voice told Eleanor, "I need you," to exploit her fear. But God used the moment to reveal something true. She was still seen, still loved, still able to learn, still able to teach, still needed, not because fear demanded it, but because God was still writing purpose into her days. If this story spoke to your heart, write the word wisdom in the comments. Let it be a simple prayer. Lord, teach me to pause, discern, and walk in truth. If this video helped you reflect, leave a like and subscribe for more Christian stories about faith, family, aging, discernment, healing, and biblical truth. And remember, fear rushes, but wisdom waits. And God still carries his people, even when the world becomes hard to understand.